Okay, tell them that they're wrong. Speak angrily. Okay, I like that. What else? Think about a rebuke. What's usually happening? Yeah, somebody is to reprimand a sharp with and so it can serve as a word of warning. These are situations that call for when somebody really needs to be straightened out. We might use expressions, jump down somebody's throat. You ever had to do that? You ever had that done to you? Where somebody, family, spouse, boss, kind of maybe physically or maybe, metaphor, maybe symbolically, I don't know how to say it, but maybe they kind of pull you aside and they jump down your throat and they say, listen, I don't have time. You ever had that? I can't explain a lot. Don't do that ever again. You ever had that? I don't ever want to see that again. If you do that again, you will be, well, as a child, I will light you up. We would say things like that. I will light a fire under your backside. I will bring down the house. I mean, we've used those phrases. I will tear down this house. I've used this phrase before. Wood by wood, brick by brick. Don't do that, right? I mean, you're trying to really challenge and rebuke somebody and confront somebody with something. And so we don't like to do that. We don't want to hear that ourselves when we're in trouble or when we've done something. It's confrontational. It's hard. It's gut-wrenching when we have those moments when we have to pull somebody aside. And so he says, don't do that. Don't rebuke an older man harshly. And it's going to seem like a little bit of a contradiction, because he's going to talk about exhorting or encouraging or admonishing. And we'll come back to that in just a minute. But how does he say we need to view people? Before you start correcting and rebuking and confronting, and what's he say here in these verse 1 and 2? How do we see each other? As family. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in the sermon a little bit. Just worked perfectly that way. Wish I could say I planned it that way. But he says, you treat them like family. You treat the older men like what? Like fathers. Respect and reverence and honor. Now, I know I'm not ever saying we don't fuss and fight and have words, but I'm saying if you were raised like I was raised, you didn't speak to your mother and father in certain ways. You just didn't do it. Just once, yeah, once. And you're still alive, Roy. Barely, right? Yeah. Yeah, you don't do that. My mom, she could, she's not in here. I didn't see her in the back. She could, I'm telling you, she could, if she was a boxer, she could get a quick jab in. She was, a couple of times growing up, wow, boy, what did you, and she'd say, don't talk to me that way. I mean, it wasn't like every day, every week, but there was a few times. Of course, it was terrible when you, on your ego, when I'm 16, 17, 18, and there was a time, a couple of times she missed because I could see it coming. And I knew. I could see. And as soon as I said it, I knew, ooh, I shouldn't have said that. Shouldn't have said that. How you treat them. You treat the older men as fathers. You treat the younger men as brothers. You treat the older women as mothers. You treat the younger women as sisters. You treat them as family. Timothy, okay. Timothy's got to do some what? Correcting? Is that clearly why Paul, that's one of the primary things Paul has sent him to do, right? Is what? Straighten out, confront what? The elders' false what? false teaching. The church at Ephesus, things are not going what? Going good, going right. Timothy has been sent, but be careful. Paul doesn't want Timothy to, what can we have a tendency if somebody says, I want you to go up there and I want you to correct that. I want you to take care of that situation. You know, the guys aren't doing it right or the girls aren't doing it right up whatever job. Or what can we have a tendency if we're not careful to? I mean, we can't even get in the door, right? I've been sent here. And we can start what? I mean, correcting, but we're just laying into people, right? What? Rebuke, yeah. And how has your experience, again, especially when, I mean, I talked about jumping down someone's throat, especially when you've got a relationship with someone or you know someone. I mean, that can, you can do that and get away with it. But in general speaking, how have you responded? How have you seen people respond when somebody just is just jumping down people? What? Punch you out? Yeah, sometimes it'll get physical, right? Yeah, they just shut you off. The goal, listen, is to be heard. Yeah. I mean, you can come in and just, I mean, you can get some things done with a hammer. You just pounding people. But for the most part, people will just kind of, they'll lose respect. They'll start tuning you out. I mean, people will do the bare minimum that they know they have to do to keep their job, but they're not going to, there's going to be no relationship, right? You ever seen that? You ever seen that with a parent, with a child? It's just, matter of fact, Paul will even give instructions to fathers in Colossians. By the way, the Roman father had absolute total authority control over his family, including he could sell his children into slavery. They would practice basically a form of abortion. If a child was born, it was a female, they could do exposure, just put the child out in areas and let the child die. That the wife could say nothing, the wife could do nothing, the father had absolute authority. And so when he gets over in Colossians 3, what's he tell those fathers? Don't exasperate what? Your children in your discipline. Because they had total, I mean, they could just, right? And you've seen that. The goal is to be heard. And you don't do that by just whipping people, beating people. And so, yes, there needs to be firmness. Yes, there needs to be, we're not talking about wishy-washy or anything like that. And so, what you've got is how can you correct and rebuke, so to speak, and yet have encouragement? Well, a lot of it's, what do we say? It's how you what? It's how you do it, how you say it. What else? You have to respect them. You don't come in and belittle them or talk down to them or insult them. They're trying to do a job. They've done this. Maybe you've been in that situation at work where you're looking at someone going, buddy, I've been doing this a long time. And I know you're the boss now, the manager or the boss's grandson or whatever, whoever you are. And I know, but you don't like to be talked down to. And so I think that's important here that Timothy, that he recognizes that. And then how does he say, do it in all what? Look how he finishes there in verse 2. With what? What do you think that's tying into here? I think a couple of things are at play. I think motives, honesty, I think are there. I also think there's the connotation would be here when you introduce purity in this context. I think we talked about this at the end of last week. Timothy, guard your doctrine, but also guard your life. Be exemplary. Be above reproach. It's not just for elders. So Timothy is likely going to be dealing with, the older, the younger, women. And in all this, he says, you do things in purity. You understand what I'm talking about? So I think it's honesty, sincerity, but don't overlook the fact that, I mean, go back to these deacons. What did we say? I said we're not going to talk about deacons again and keep coming back to it now. They're likely going to go in house to house and deal with these situations. Well, you know what that can potentially, right, when it comes to purity, you can take advantage of people. And so he says here, you do this in purity in this regard. And go ahead, yeah, Ron. And doing it for the right reasons. Yeah, do it for the right reasons. But purity, how you conduct yourself, is very important. You know, I talked about that earlier, being above reproach. It shouldn't just be for elders and deacons and ministers. Again, I've tried to conduct myself that way. So you're not going to drive by the Manfred restaurant and see me having lunch with a female. And you go, and even if you know them, you're not going to see that. But by myself, you're not going to, because above reproach, I want to be heard. My integrity, my reputation, my respect for my wife to not do something like that. And so even if nothing is being done, you know, several years ago, and I don't know what your side and which political side you fall on, but you know, I remember when Vice President Pence made a statement about he doesn't, you know, go in elevators alone, or he's not. I mean, the media just, oh, what a fuddy-duddy, well, you haven't seen his name drugged through at least the affairs of, you know, it's important. And so do your work in above reproach, everything you do in purity. And so, okay, let's get into verses 3 now through let's get into the widows here. Somebody read, let's do 3 through 8. Who's got that for me? Verses 3 through 8. Okay. Laura? The verse 8. Okay, so you find this phrase throughout this chapter, those who are truly widows. So there's qualification, there's criteria. Again, why would, we've talked about the situation in the first century. They didn't have social services. They didn't have, you know, you give on the street, or you know, they're not going to come and evict you and throw an elderly lady out on the street necessarily. I mean, there's resources, there's financial things, there's first century they didn't have that. And so the church is called as a family to take care of the family. But there needs to be qualifications. Why qualify that? Why not just say, anybody that's a widow, just come on in? And by the way, it's a financial, enroll has a financial aspect. So it's clearly they're going on the church payroll. That's how I would say that. But so why qualify that? Why not just, no need to apply, just show up and get your check? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and this is a way that they reflect and model and demonstrate their faith and love for God. And so, yes, there's family. Yeah, Jeff? Okay, absolutely. Right. Yeah. It is the primary task, is the mission of the church and the teaching and preaching of the gospel. It's not to say these secondary matters are not extremely important and that they're very close to the heart of God, but the church can't get bogged down in all their resources, including the apostles. Remember, they said, we're not going to get bogged down in waiting of tables. They're not saying this is not an important work. They're saying we've been called to this work, which is the primary work. And so, as Jeff said, the church could spend every dime on this. There's no, and so the qualifications for who can receive it, and then, of course, the family that he'll mention. What else did they come to mind here? Right. Yeah. And so there can also be abuse. Now that never happens today, right? Oh my. Um, sure. It can be in the church that way. Yeah, church will just do it. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the, absolutely. This is there is always the potential for abuse and corruption, and all of this. And so he uses the language, those who are truly widows. And it's not that, wait a minute, are some widows more widows than the other? No, but to be financially assisted. Yeah, Matt, jump in here, Matthew. Mhm. Absolutely. You know, I've seen that. I've heard that even from some of our larger congregations, elders, some ministers over years that say, we're having to some of the big churches are having to rethink this, because what they're finding out is exactly what Matthew is saying is, if the church just does all this, we kind of are establishing kind of a spiritual welfare members that can't do anything, don't want to do anything. It's always let the church do it. Let the church provide. That's the church's responsibility. And as Matthew says, no, this is how we grow and exercise and show our faith, so that now we are effective. Because if you don't use your faith, if you're not exercising it, what's that faith going to become? We know it's going to become weak. If it's just gimme, 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 church, yeah, that isn't good for anybody. So absolutely, Matthew. Yeah, go ahead, Rhonda. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really beautiful. Mackenzie was telling us, our middle daughter went on a international with school at Harding. They did some schooling, okay? They did some schoolwork, but it was mostly, wow, look at all these countries they got to see. One of them, of course, was Japan, and that is so important in the country of Japan, is how you treat the elderly. You just do not disrespect them, and they would be in horror, as I'm sure they are, if when they come over our country and see how we treat and how we sometimes throw away the elderly. And it is very much an honor culture with the elderly. Yes, okay, Angie? Right. Yes. No, yes. There's a little bit of that yes and no in there. Yeah. Obviously, widows are widows. But when it comes to, he's going to get into the which widows can be financially supported by the church. He's going to give these qualifications that there's some criteria that they need to meet. And so, yes, they're all the same in one sense, but they're not the same in how they can be provided for, if they have family, if they have, and then the qualifications that he gives. Let's notice that here. We got the 5-minute warning here. Let me get into a little bit of these specifics. But support is based on a value. Now, I know we don't like to think about that, but there's no way around that. The language here, those who are really in need, he'll define that here. But he's going to mention there in verse 4, if the widow has children and grandchildren, these should learn first, and I like how what Matthew talked about, put their religion into practice. This is an opportunity for them to show their religion, to grow their faith and demonstrate their love for God. And so he says that their children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents. For this is, there's just no way around this language. If you don't like the language, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I can't change it. That repaying, that has value. I mean, he's using language that show that they have done this, and it should correspond to this as far as reverence and respect and care. There's a correlation there. You give it back, so to speak. They've provided for you. Now it's your time to provide for them. And so, but you have basically the fifth command. Honor your father and mother. Let me tell you what that means. When you're young, when you're under their rule, it means obey and submit to your parents. That's what that means. Now, of course, in the Lord, so it has to be that which is not, goes against God's will. But when you honor your parents, when you're younger, children, I would say, in the home, 18-ish and under, kind of, that means you obey your parents. That's what that means. When you get out of the home as an adult, it means you take care of them. You look after them. Now, the sticky part on that one is, you don't know my parents. You don't know my mom. You don't know my dad. I don't read that in there. Honor your father and mother if they've really been good. No, it doesn't say that. And so here, he's going to tie into the worthiness, obviously, of these Christian widows here. But the point here is that they've got to demonstrate their faith and love for God. And so now, when their families have done that, their parents have been, worthy of that, it's time for them to repay. And isn't that great when you've had those opportunities? A couple of years ago, I moved out of the people buying me things phase. I don't know when it happened, but a couple of years ago, I started to notice that. Hey, I'm buying dinner most of the time now. Well, we'd go with our folks or my folks or Maggie's folks, and I mean, I knew kind of sometimes how that would work. Some of you got to get the waitress. If she's coming in at 5 o'clock to start her shift and you're coming in, you got to grab her in the parking lot and say, you give me the ticket. You got to I've seen, you got to be creative, right? When you come in and your wife is saying party is 6, you're telling I got the ticket. Because and so it happened a few years ago where I was like, hey, I'm kind of buying all the time now. And it just kind of, but, whether it was my parents or, Maggie's folks, isn't it great to give back, to repay? I mean, my folks, and Maggie's folks, I mean, we had nothing. We didn't know anything. And it was our parents. They moved us into NSU, married housing. They fixed our car. There's a funny story one day, I'll use it in a sermon illustration, but I caught our little, Maggie's little white Ford, what was it, Tempo? On fire. In Arkansas, we were at Harding, and we were meeting Maggie's parents halfway. We would sometimes do that on a Saturday at Cracker Barrel. Anyway, I blew a head gasket, overheated. The mechanic told me to park it outside the garage. Well, I just pulled into some high grass. I'm in there talking to him. He's like, hey, your car's on fire. So they went from, Maggie's folks bought Cracker Barrel that day, I promise you. We get that car and it's got smoke, black flames all around the side. And my dad tried to buff that thing out. Remember, it was like 11 o'clock. I was late. We would sometimes leave on a Saturday, 5, 6, 7, sometimes after church on Sunday nights. And we'd go back to Harding. And I mean, I think it was what, 10:30. My dad's out there trying to get that. I mean, that's just all the stuff have done for us. And now it gives me great joy when I can to what? To give back. It's just, and so I think that's, now don't be thinking you're going to lunch with me afterwards, okay? You're not my mother, father, but no, I'll buy your lunch. But anyway, it's a great, Jeff. Is anybody else coming on your pew? Is this it? I mean, because your ticket's going to get bigger and bigger. But it is, and that's what Paul wants Timothy to realize, that he's able to instruct the church in. And so we'll get into the specifics, kind of get through this section down through verse 17 next week, because I want to finish this section next week through verse 16 and talk about more of these specifics about the qualifications for these widows. Okay.